A small community in a post-apocalyptic wasteland is threatened by violent maniacs, and only Mad Max can help. Join us as we chat about the MMCU, the most annoying thing about Fast and the Furious, and traditional marriage after the end of the world. Then we find out if the Road Warrior stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with the glutton. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Test of Time. I'm James Brief, and joining me, as always, is Alan Noah. How you doing, Al?
Hi, I am doing very well. Good to see you again, James.
Right now, we're having that, just leaving a really cold winter, and it's really getting nice out, so things are changing. Speaking of changing, this film, Mad Max 2, also called The Road Warrior, we'll talk about that. But
okay.
While there were definitely car chases in both films, this was definitely a genre changer from, kind of a somewhat lawless Wild West kind of Mad Max 1 to this is post-apocalyptic. There is no gasoline anywhere, and there is lawless rape and pillaging everywhere. A complete genre change to kind of what people think of today as Mad Max films.
I don't know that I agree with that, James. I think that the change in tone is there. It's noticeable. There's obviously a change in setting from society crumbling in Mad Max to society has crumbled, past tense, in this movie. But I don't think it's a genre change. I think it is the same basic ideas, the same basic stuff. This movie is just cranked up.
It's post-apocalyptic. The first one is not post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, but it's still good guys versus bad guys, car chases, motorcycles, explosions, murders.
I mean, the first one, there is civilization, and the second one, there's no more civilization. It's semantics because the first one leads to the second one, but it definitely is talked about how there is definitely a change, similar to the way, say, the Fast and the Furious films. I know you're not a fan of those films, but you're aware that the first film was kind of a street racing film, and you're probably, tangentially aware that the latest films are basically the most ridiculous James Bond. It's in space and, everything, lasers and satellite beams, and the fate of the world rests on Dom and his crew. While there's still car scenes and definitely car races, and they are still fast and somewhat furious. It's definitely a genre change, and it is interesting when there are films that, while they stay in the same world, say, there's definitely, wow, that is a very different film than the first one.
Okay, I cannot speak to Fast and the Furious because I've seen zero of those movies, and I never, ever will watch any of them.
Yes, you will.
Nope. A quick tangent. The last time me and the family were at Universal Studios, we went on the Fast and the Furious ride. I'm down for any ride. Why the hell not? And I think my daughter was like, what's the Fast and the Furious about? And I said, I don't know. I've never seen any of the movies. The only thing I know is that it's about cars, and they talk about family a lot. From the song and from the trailers I've seen.
And the memes.
Yeah, and the memes, sure. It takes a lot for my kids to admit that I was right. In just like those videos you watch, like while you're waiting online, they say the word family 8,000 fucking times.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's so insane. And they were like, why do they just keep talking about family? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, yeah, you're right. They really do talk about family.
They do. And it's probably my least favorite part of the Fast and Furious films.
Okay.
But speaking of Vin Diesel, have you ever seen a small film of his, one of his earliest films called Pitch Black?
Yes. And didn't they just announce that they're making another one?
Right, the fourth one. And if you've seen the third one, the third film is very similar to the first film. Kind of a horror film, aliens trying to escape a desolate planet,
right.
First and the third film. But if you've seen the second film of that franchise, The Chronicles of Riddick, have you ever seen that?
I don't think so. I definitely did see the first one. I don't think I ever saw the second or third.
I mean, that is a major change from like a small little horror film. It's a space epic. That's basically what it is. And a huge budget and big change. I personally wasn't a big fan of that, but I applauded them for taking something that wasn't well-known IP. It was kind of an indie hit, and they went swinging for the fences. However, I have to say, by far biggest genre change is a film that we reviewed very early on. We reviewed both of these films. I can give you a very obvious and hilarious hint.
Okay.
But it involves one of my favorite Key and Peele sketches specifically about the creation of this bonkers sequel.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about Gremlins and Gremlins 2, the new batch. I, again, think I disagree. It's been a while since I've seen both of those movies, but Gremlins 2 is much, much funnier. They're definitely leaning way harder into the comedy aspect, for sure, but it's not a radically different thing, I don't think.
No, I think we have different definitions of what genre means. That's a horror film. I think Gremlins 1 is scary. I mean, randomly, I guess you could be scared of Spider Gremlin for a moment, but the first film was definitely scary, and there's like bad murders in the first film. Are there murders in the second film? Maybe there is. Kind of off camera, the scientist maybe.
Yeah, Christopher Lee. I think that's like the one death. And I think there's only like one on-screen death in the first movie too.
I mean, the second film literally has the film, not the movie, but the actual film breakdown, and Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster, he tells the projector booth that those gremlins better put the rest of the film on or he's going to get up there and beat them up. That is a genre change, Al. Joe Dante apparently only would do Gremlins 2 if they let him basically go nuts and do whatever the hell he wanted. That is not basically Gremlins Part 2. You'll at least admit that. They could have given another Gremlins and they accidentally feed it after midnight and it's another, they go a little crazy in another town. They could have done that and they go way different.
I hear what you're saying, and it's been a while since I've watched the two of them back to back. I just feel like it's a very exaggerated version. It's maybe in the same ballpark, but like at the very opposite ends of the ballpark. Whatever. Again, we are nitpicking semantics, which is fun for me, by the way.
Right. I mean, we're nitpicking semantics. I mean, like people always say alien versus aliens. There's a lot that's very similar about them. However, I do think it's fair to say that Ridley Scott made a horror film and James Cameron made more of an action film. That is scary, but it's not a horror film.
Right.
So today you bring up some good points too. That while they're very close, I do think that the Mad Max today is known much more for the genre of film that the Road Warrior and I haven't seen the Thunderdome in 30 years, but from what I remember, Thunderdome and Fury Road. Whereas when people think of Mad Max, and we brought this up last week in last week's episode, that you may be surprised that there's not going to be crazy guys in Mohawk dune buggies with bodies hanging off of these cars in the middle of a desolate desert. That is every other film in this genre, starting with The Road Warrior.
Yes, I feel like Mad Max is sort of like the origin story, kind of like the prequel before you get into the story proper, as it were, I guess.
Exactly. It's not necessary to watch Mad Max, but it adds a little bit to it if you had seen it. In some ways, maybe detracts from it. In some ways, I might argue that it's probably better to start with Road Warrior.
Okay. But let's give our listeners a recap of this movie. So The Road Warrior continues the story of Mad Max, a former police officer who is haunted by the loss of his family. That's in the first movie.
Family.
Exactly. See, we're doing it too. After civilization's collapse, Max wanders the wasteland looking for fuel. He meets a man who has built a gyrocopter, and who shows Max a small community desperately defending an oil refinery from a brutal gang, led by Lord Humongous and his main henchman, Wes. Max isn't interested in helping the people inside the refinery, but he agrees to get them a tanker for all the fuel he can carry. Max delivers the tanker and leaves, but is then attacked by Wes and left for dead. He then decides to drive the tanker for the good guys, knowing that he's their best hope of escaping Humongous, Wes, and their gang. After an epic road battle, the bad guys are defeated, the good guys escape, and Max decides to go his own way. So I have to assume that this did really well at the box office because a few years later they made a third one.
Yeah, and before we go into the box office, I'm going to talk about the title of this film, as I said we would. Sometimes it's referred to as Mad Max 2, sometimes it's The Road Warrior, and the title as it is today, as it is on the official Warner Brothers Blu-ray, is Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, kind of to put all this together.
When naming the movies for the podcast, like when I post the episodes, the thing that I've been doing is naming the episodes based on how the movie was released initially. So when we did that movie from 1977 with the guy with the lightsaber, I called that episode Star Wars, not Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. I know that's what it is referred to now, but in 77, it was just Star Wars. So that's been my little thing that I've been doing, and I've been trying to be consistent. When I watched this movie streaming on Max the other day, the title just said The Road Warrior. That's it. Because that's how it was released in the States, because they didn't want to call it Mad Max 2, because people in America didn't really see the first one because it was like barely released in theaters.
Exactly, almost. I'm going to add one last thing, that the DVD or Blu-rays that are released today, they're released as Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. The title card now today can say either one, Mad Max 2 or The Road Warrior. So,
got it.
We went over last week that Mad Max did okay in the States. It made like $8.5 million, but it made like $100 million worldwide, and it was the biggest Aussie film that opened up the Australian film market. The thing is that Warner Brothers, which released The Road Warrior, it knew it had a big hit, or it knew it had something that the world liked, but it just didn't hit in America. Remember, there's no internet, there's no way for America to learn about this unless a magazine picks it up or something like that. So The Road Warrior is made, and for the whole world, it's going to be Mad Max 2. But for Americans, if you see Mad Max 2 as the poster, that would confuse people, and they go, oh, I don't know what Mad Max is, so I don't want to watch Mad Max 2. I'll be totally confused.
Sure.
So it was released in America as just this kind of cool title, The Road Warrior. But getting back to the box office, The Road Warrior was released on May 21st, 1982, and it opened at number 4 with $2.5 million.
And just, sorry to interrupt, but you mean in the U.S., because it did open in Australia at the end of 81.
Right, because this was an Australian film, one of those rare times when a film would open worldwide before America, because, this is usually a Hollywood production.
Sure.
So you open in America, it opened with $2.5 million, packed weekend. We reviewed the number 1. It was apparently the film that ruined Conan O'Brien's childhood.
No idea.
Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Sure.
Conan O'Brien always talks about, especially when he has Arnold on, but he talks about how essentially Conan O'Brien's physique would be the opposite of Conan, and no one had ever heard of that name before, and then suddenly it's like, hey, Conan, where's your sword? And, Arnold Schwarzenegger in 1984 being a little bit strong.
Right.
So, and it also had Porky's.
Okay.
And then a film I've never heard of called Real Men Wear Plaid.
Never heard of that.
Never heard of it. This one came in at number 4. It wound up grossing $23 million in the States, triple the first film, the first film's take. Certainly a big moneymaker.
Got it. All right, and so the movie starts with voiceover. It's not clear in the beginning of the movie who is narrating. We find out at the very end that, spoiler alert, it's the little kid who doesn't talk in the movie. He just kind of grunts and growls, but then he grows up to be their leader, and he's the one who's telling the story. It serves kind of just to recap what happened in the first movie. If you didn't see Mad Max because you live in America and aren't like a huge film buff and, you didn't track down a copy of it, this tells you everything you need to know about the first movie.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fair that this voiceover is there. This is not a dialogue-heavy film, so no. I don't think George Miller wants people conversing over a campfire and talking about the old times when there was civilization. I think voiceover works very well in this film. The little gimmick at the end that you find out, it was the boy the whole time. It doesn't really add anything to it.
No.
There is a fantastic line line in the narration, though. This is definitely a very post-apocalyptic world, but there's a really great line where they talk about the two tribes went to war with each other. Maybe it's USA and Soviet Union, but it doesn't matter because whoever's going to end civilization, there'll be two tribes going to war with each other. But the narrator says a great line, and he says, the war between the two tribes that destroys the world happened for reasons today that are completely forgotten. And you know what? That's probably what's going to happen, whatever it is. I mean, what would it be today? Could it be because Vladimir Putin went into the Crimea? Could it be the events that happened on October 7th, 2023? You know, no one's going to remember in 50 years, a generation or two after the apocalypse. What was that assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand? And, you know, if you read the history, it's not like people went to war because he was assassinated. It's a Rube Goldberg machine of this happens and this happens and this happens. That stuck with me. That's the end of the world. There's nothing left. And you know what? It wasn't for anything that anyone remembers, I'll tell you that. Maybe it was for something important, but not important enough for this boy to have heard about.
Yeah, it's a good line, but that line is completely undone in the movie itself, because the gyro captain is talking about, oh, you know what I hate about this world? I miss the old days. I miss perfume. I miss lingerie. Remember lingerie? Lingerie was great. So if you remember lingerie, because the world only ended a handful of years ago, yeah, you are going to remember what caused the apocalypse. So it's bullshit. Also, I saw on IMDb, I don't know if this is canon or not, but that this movie takes place 5 years after Mad Max, like a week or so after the events of the first movie. Then there's a nuclear holocaust, and that is what ends civilization catastrophically and definitively. Okay, fine, neat, but Max would know what happened. Everyone who's an adult then would know and would remember and would probably talk about it. So while I appreciate the line of no one even remembers what caused it, it's like, yeah, but no, they all do. They all would. That's bullshit.
I absolutely agree with you that this is a flaw in the film, because the film itself really, in my mind, takes place well into the apocalypse. I agree with you, Al, that it doesn't make sense that this gyrocopter guy, who's 40 at most, you know, so this shouldn't be that long ago that he remembers lingerie. But the movie it's tackling with the fact that Mad Max 1 was not end of civilization, and this is still the same looking Mel Gibson. So they're not just going to say 100 years later. But in my mind, there is a time jump. You can't quite explain it. Yeah, these guys remember civilization, but I'm just choosing to kind of think that those are mistakes in the film. They should not be remembering civilization. The film works it makes a lot more sense if Mad Max 1 is just, it's a different guy. And Mel Gibson happens to play a character that looks like the first guy.
And has the same name and same backstory.
And there's flashbacks to the exact same first film.
Sure.
You know what I mean. I'm just saying the flaw in the film is basically those few throwaway lines that Mad Max 1 really did happen 5 years ago. The car that Max is driving in the beginning is the same car he drives in the first one, albeit it much more beat up. And I do like that they aged it 5 years.
Apparently the car was like scrapped after production of the first movie, you know, because there were no plans to make a sequel. And then when they got the green light to make the sequel, someone found the car that was like, you know, in terrible, terrible shape, and they were able to buy it back and then use it for this movie, which is kind of a neat story.
Oh, and it works perfectly because it looks much more burnt. Like, I needed them to tell me it was an Interceptor. They're like, the last of the Interceptors.
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, it is his car.
But also to your point about this future being 5 years, 10 years, however many years after the apocalypse, there is an oil refinery that is there and working. There's also a fan theory that like the guy who leads the compound worked at one of the oil companies in the before times, and George Miller didn't really give them a lot of backstories and kind of told them all, yeah, the backstory is whatever the hell you want it to be. Make it up. And yes, you are correct. That is the character's backstory. Have fun. He didn't care. But like the whole compound thing really confused me. Like when we first see the compound, it looks like It's secure, kinda. They have the flamethrowers and stuff, but there's a lot of these bad guys. And I kinda didn't get why the bad guys hadn't taken it over yet. Like, it seemed like if they were really determined to get into this place, there's a school bus blocking the entrance. Neat, a school bus is big, sure, but like, couldn't they just break in the middle of the night? Like, couldn't they have gotten in if they really wanted to?
Yes, but I think what we see is the extent of their gang. Their gang's about 35 big, and they're fighting against the walled fortress. I mean, this is ancient warfare stuff. The wall is going to be hard to penetrate. They have a few warriors. That woman, she's definitely, she knows how to fight. There's a couple guys that know how to fight. You're right. I think if he threw all the forces at them, if Humongous threw all the forces at them, they would emerge victorious, but I think he'd have a few people left. I think it also... I was surprised that it was a refinery and not just a big tanker of oil that they had just, happened to be sitting there. I think Humongous is, it's implied that he's somewhat intelligent. I think Humongous knows that there's something here you don't want to destroy by just like flinging catapults of fire in there.
That's fair, but you hit on a perfect word in there. You said it's implied. And there's a lot in this movie that is implied, because it's also implied that Lord Humongous is maybe not super evil. Like, he's a bad guy, don't get me wrong, and we don't like him. He's evil, kinda, but Wes is worse. He's more vicious. They have like this standoff, and Humongous gives them an ultimatum. He says, you're going to leave this refinery, you leave us the oil, and we will allow you to go. We will give you safe passage. There has been enough death and destruction. And then all the people in the compound, they kind of debated, is he a man of his word? Maybe, yes. Oh, I don't know. I don't trust him. But like, it's not stated, and it's not clear, why does anyone believe this man in a hockey mask who is named Lord Humongous, that he will let us leave? He's a man who will be true to his word. Because we see a couple of scouts, a couple of people leave the compound, and they are murdered. We see the woman brutally raped. This is under Lord Humongous's watch. This is not a peaceful neighbor situation. These guys are fucking bad. And yeah, I get that we're supposed to think that Wes is worse, and Wes is like the animal that Humongous needs to control. But God, there's a lot of fucking exposition in this movie, and 2 lines of exposition about this power dynamic within the bad guys would have gone a long, long way.
Yeah, but I basically, in my head, can agree with everything you're saying. I don't think Humongous is a good guy, but I think he just realizes you don't have to be completely ruthless to get your means. He just knows there might be 2 ways to get this: killing all these people and not killing all these people. I don't have to kill them. I'm not going to like let them live here. Yeah, he does have to control Wes, but there are different levels of bad guys. But Wes is the guy that wants to go immediately in and burn everyone to death because his woman was killed by that boomerang.
Wasn't his woman. That was his boyfriend.
The blonde?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, everyone there is kind of androgynous, to be fair.
And I mean, it's interesting that this evil villain has a boyfriend. Also reading on IMDb, someone has said that no, it's not his boyfriend. It's like his adopted son. He's like got him in a chain that he carries around with him. It seems like it's sexual. And then when he dies, he is hurt. I thought immediately that's his boyfriend.
Oh, so are there no women on the gang side? I actually thought that was a woman.
No, and apparently that character was written to be a woman, and the warrior woman in the compound, who I think her character name is like Warrior Woman. She doesn't have a name, which is problematic, whatever. She was supposed to be a man, and the boyfriend was supposed to be a woman, and they flipped it. And I think there was some line that, in the future, gender roles are meaningless. It doesn't matter. And, that's progressive and neat and cool.
I have a feeling that traditional marriage has broken down in this society. So
sure, I think that is probably fair. But There's also a scene later in the movie where the bad guys try to breach the compound, and it looks like a couple of bad guys are left. Like Wes is able to escape, and he's like, "Oh, we'll be back later." Rah, 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 rah. But it seems like the good guys have captured a couple of the bad guys. And then later, we see that the bad guys have captured a couple of the good guys, and they're like torturing them late at night, and they're the people who are like, they stick on the front of the car later. I just had a hard time keeping track of what was going on.
The bad guys putting the live bodies on the front of their cars, that was totally sick, and that is definitely something that is used to terrify the enemy.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about this brutality of these bad guys. Because we see them kidnap these people, kill the guy, rape the woman, or I guess they don't kill the guy, they leave him barely alive, and then he dies a short time later. Max and the gyro captain watch this happen. They watch the woman get raped. And I understand that Max is an anti-hero. He is reluctant throughout this movie to pitch in and help, but I hate him. I hate him in that moment that he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't say, "Oh, I have to go help her." He doesn't try. He doesn't even talk about trying. He doesn't care. And I don't think that that stands a test of time, even for an anti-hero. There's tons of anti-heroes now, but I don't think you could have a bad guy who you kind of are rooting for anyway watch someone be brutally raped and stand there and do nothing and shrug their shoulders and that still be a character that you're rooting for. In the next Suicide Squad movie, none of those guys are going to watch someone be raped and not care.
Well, first of all, you picked a comic book movie to compare to this. If you're saying the next Road Warrior Furiosa is not going to have that.
Sure.
Yet. Okay.
Either way. Any which way.
I understand what you're saying. I disagree with it for a couple reasons. One, I think this is George Miller's way of saying this is the absolute brutal and lawless land that they live in. Two, I believe you're saying a flaw of the character rather than a flaw of a movie. I absolutely believe a movie would show rape as a brutality, even if a character were watching it and not doing anything. In this particular case, I think George Miller has no problem showing it because Max he is completely brutalized by the first film, his wife and kid being killed. He doesn't care about any of this. He's literally just watching and waiting, and he goes up to that guy. The woman is, she's dead, and the man is dying. He doesn't go to help him. He doesn't do anything. He says, "I'm only here for the gasoline." He does let him assure him that I'm not here to terrorize you more. The third thing that I completely disagree with you on, it would have been absolutely foolhardy of him to try to intervene here. I do not think it's gentlemanly to try to stop a rape if you're going to die as well. Like, you're guaranteed to die as well. There's a whole gang with like cars and guns and arrows and everything. He has one gun, maybe a bullet or two. He's on top of a mountain. He cannot sneak up to these people. I agree that's brutal. You said one thing, he doesn't care. We don't know. I think it's possible he doesn't care because he doesn't care yet. I think this character doesn't need to be a hero, and I do think you would be able to get away with this today.
I very strongly disagree. You want to root for him, even if he's cold-hearted and he doesn't really care. You still want Max to succeed, and to your point about going down to help would be suicide, okay, but then he needs to say that. That needs to be verbally stated. I wish I could help her, but it would be suicide or something like that. Or Gyrocopter says, "Aren't you going to help her? You're so tough. You're so strong." And he says, "I have one bullet. There's no way." Something like that. That wouldn't negate everything that I'm saying and feeling, but it would help.
He shouldn't be saying that because that's not what Max Rockanowski, I think that's his full name.
Whatever.
Mad Max. He doesn't care. He might care later about people. But, and again, is that a flaw of the movie, a flaw of the character? Or is it a character that now will be able to develop into someone who does care about someone more than himself?
Yeah, but spoiler alert, he doesn't. He ends the movie completely not caring about anyone. He has no arc in this movie. He has an arc in the first movie. It's the journey from a good guy cop to I don't give a fuck vigilante. So it's kind of like the opposite of the arc that we're more used to of, the bad guy learning a lesson and growing. Mad Max devolves in the first movie. That's fine. That's allowed. You can do that. But his arc in this movie is a straight line. He doesn't have an arc.
I disagree. I believe at the end, he does try to escape on his own in his interceptor, and he tries to outrun the gang just on his own, and he gets his ass beaten, and he should. That was a very stupid thing to do. It destroys that beautiful interceptor car, and Max almost dies. But I don't think he had to join the chase at the end. He chooses and he insists, I will drive the tanker, which is obviously going to be the hardest thing. He volunteers this. And I think he does that because he does care for these people.
Okay, so you think he has a change of heart?
I think he returns to probably the person he was. He was a cop at one point. He was presumably a good cop, a family man. I don't know if it's a change of heart. I think he was deep down good. I don't think he ever turned evil.
Okay, that's all interesting. None of that is in the fucking movie. He says he's going to leave, and he leaves. He's attacked. He's almost killed. Then he goes back and says, now I'm going to do it. The head of the compound says, why? Why are you doing it? Why this change of heart? He wants to know. He's like me, or I'm like him, I guess, genuinely curious. And Max says, I'm your best hope. And then he does it. We don't see what changed his mind. The only thing that we see that happens when he's attacked, you didn't mention this, they kill his fucking dog. They kill his beloved companion, and so the only thing the movie shows us about why he has this change of heart is he's mad and he wants revenge. Okay, that's fine. You see that in lots of movies. That's fine. John Wick, right? They kill his dog. He goes on a killing spree. But that's exactly what happened in the first movie. That's the same character arc. They killed his family and he wants revenge. That's what Wes is doing in this movie. So, okay, they're mirror versions of the same thing. That old trope. Eye roll. But give me something different. Yes, I understand not a lot of people saw the first Mad Max who saw this one, but if you did, and especially if you're like us and you watched it one fucking week ago, I'm like, it's the same fucking motivation.
I mean, I don't think he had to help the kid the way he helped the kid. There's a part where he saves the kid's life. Yes, the kid winds up helping him by retrieving a bullet from the truck, so it's a good thing he helped the kid. But
when does he help him just to help him?
He's really being attacked on the truck driver driving the truck, and then he leans out the side and pulls the kid in with one arm. I'm just saying he didn't have to do that. When Max says, I'm your best chance, it's unclear whether he means I'm also my best chance, aka, if you guys are going to survive, I will survive with you, because if any of you are surviving, it's going to be me. Or does he mean I'm your best chance, you guys aren't going to survive unless I do it? Because if he takes one of those random cars, I think he might be able to survive, because he didn't survive just taking the interceptor, but that was the whole gang on one. I think he could have survived, but you are correct now that you say it. But I choose to believe that he wants to help these people.
That's fine, and you can have that opinion, and no problem. I'm just saying that ain't in the movie.
You're right, and I think it's unfair to talk about this film in Fury Road, the character there. Well, he totally is a good guy there.
Sure.
Because really, in my opinion, these are 4 separate films. I mean, I haven't seen Thunderdome. I just know that it's not a continuation. Fury Road certainly doesn't really continue the story from any of these films. So, in my opinion, these are generally 4 different films called Mad Max.
Well, let's get to the end, the big climactic car chase. I get why they do it. I understand the kind of machinations. It still feels stupid to me. Why would they leave this compound? The bad guys are going to try to break in. They've got the walls, they've got flamethrowers, they've got weapons. It seems to me like the smarter strategic move, and I'm no military guy, but it seems like the smarter move is let them come, let them attack, kill off some of them. Then you have the backup plan, right? That if they breach the compound, then you escape out the back. But that's your last resort. And before that, you try to take out a bunch of them before you go, because they're really good on the road. They're really good at driving and shooting and killing people.
Max has seen one couple killed, but it's implied that there were 8 people that had left. And we later see some of these hostages are probably the people on the front of the car. The character played by the actress Virginia Hay, the warrior woman.
Yeah.
She says a line to the leader of the compound: they're getting stronger every day while we're getting weaker every day. Because essentially, in the world of the post-apocalypse, they're probably finding new people to recruit to their gang, versus there's no new people joining this little compound of theirs, and they are losing more and more people. I think now Humongous has the amount of people he needs, and that's why finally he's come and said, you now have 24 hours. And even Humongous, he has the amount he needs. He still doesn't want to lose any guys, so he's saying, just leave. There's been so much bloodshed. Just leave. I do think he would honor his word. I don't think his underlings would honor his word.
Right. Wes clearly isn't. And again, if there were 2 lines of dialogue about that, of like, Humongous has always been fair. Yeah, but I don't trust that new guy, Wes. And then Max says, he's in charge now. Humongous doesn't know. How do you know? I used to be a cop. Something like that. It could add 2 more lines of dialogue. Who gives a shit? But James, let me ask you what you think about The Road Warrior. Do you think it stands the test of time?
I had a great time watching this film, with one exception. I would have cut out a good part of Act 1. It's otherwise pretty tight. I was surprised how well a 1982 film could hold up. 1981, 1982, depending on where it was released. Cinematography was really cool in this film. This film really reminded me of The Walking Dead, and that series, it does show a nice breakdown of society that, things can go bad and tribalistic pretty quickly. I think there's a little bit of a mistake that this is really 5 years after the events of Mad Max 1. But there's another problem with this film some people might have, and that's Mel Gibson. You can watch this film, even if you don't like Mel Gibson, because, yeah, he's in it, but he doesn't say anything in the film, barely anything. And I would say the star of this film is the cinematography. I think really that's what the film is. There's not much of a plot. It's very paper thin. I think that these Mad Max films are just all kind of stories. They're not connected. I think it might be a mistake to make a huge world. If you made a tight trilogy of Mad Max films, that might be fine. But sure. I don't think there should be a Mad Max-averse that should be spanned 28 films.
Would you call that the MMCU? The Mad Max Cinematic Universe?
MMCU, that would be, I guess, a terrible idea. But I think this film is cool. To me, The Road Warrior, it still stands up. It's pretty cool if you don't need a lot of dialogue and you want to see a lot of car explosions. And I think this film stands the test of time. What do you think, Al? Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, however you'd like to title it. The only title I want to find out is if this is stamped 2-way stands the test of time, or if we're split down the middle.
I will start off by agreeing with you about the cinematography. The way that this movie is shot is really impressive. You definitely get the sense watching Mad Max that George Miller did not have a lot of money to spend, and in this movie, he did. He had money to spend, and he fucking spent it. The production design, the cars, the refinery, the explosions, all of that is impressive. It is. I'm not the biggest fan of car chases. I get bored by them. I think I said that last week. But they are visually impressive in this movie. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That said, it should be pointed out that there are moments in this movie that do look crappy. The boomerang just looks fake. It looks silly. Also, maybe I'm biased as an American. I only know boomerangs as toys. Maybe in the outback in Australia, they are real fucking weapons and you don't fuck around with a boomerang, and a boomerang can fucking kill someone. But I just think of them as toys because I'm from the suburbs of New York. But also, though, they do the same thing that they did in the first Mad Max movie that always pisses me off. The sped up footage, it just looks cheesy. Always, all the time. I hate that. Then when Mad Max is injured and he's hurt, then they do the slow-mo footage of him crawling, and it's all hazy, and it's like, this is cheap.
When Mel Gibson, Mad Max is hanging out of the gyrocopter and he's flying home, it's his weird green screen.
That's not green screen. That shot is actually impressive. They actually had him like on a board. Nowadays, they would use green screen. I was reading George Miller talking about that specific shot. Sorry to correct you, but like that shot I did think actually looked good.
I was saying it was, I mean, maybe this makes me a little dizzy or something.
Okay. Also, just in terms of things that look stupid, there are so many wipes in this movie. Did you notice all of the fucking wipes? They're constant.
I absolutely did. You never see this anymore.
Yes.
Only in a George Lucas or this kind of film.
Right. The wipes are fine in Star Wars. Why? Because that's where I fell in love with them. I don't think George Lucas invented them, but, you know, I'm okay with seeing them in a Star Wars movie. Also, though, it is worth noting that in Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, the movies that came out around this time, there are scenes where things happen, characters talk, you learn information, you see cool stuff, and then there's a wipe. In this movie, it's just like, now we wait, wipe. Then we see the compound, wipe. Uh-oh, we better get going, wipe. Like, there's just so many of them in such short periods of time. They're not even scenes. They're like scenelets, kind of. I don't know what you'd call them, but it just makes it more noticeable, all of the wipes. Yes, the plot is thin. Yes, it did remind me also of The Walking Dead. I was thinking of that season with Negan when there's like the good guy town and the bad guy compound, and they're kind of just going back and forth who's going to invade and, you know, what's going to happen. This movie kind of has that kind of vibe, and that's not a bad thing, but there's too much that's implied. There's too much that you have to fill in with headcanon that really pisses me off. You can do that with a little bit more exposition, a couple lines of dialogue, and still have it be all of the car chases and the explosions and everything. Also, you mentioned Mel Gibson, so I do feel like I owe you and our listeners an apology. Last week, I went on a rant about how much I hate Mel Gibson for being an anti-Semite. And you know what? I'm sorry for not mentioning the fact that he's also racist and homophobic and a misogynist and has also been credibly accused of domestic violence. I didn't mention any of that.
You like to apologize?
Yes, I'd like to apologize for not mentioning all of those other flaws about Mel Gibson, who really, by all accounts, seems to be a shit person. But putting my feelings about him aside, I didn't care for this movie. Believe it or not, James, I swear to God, I was kind of on the fence about saying yes, that this movie does stand the test of time, just because of all it's inspired. This post-apocalyptic wasteland thing, George Miller kind of invented that with this movie, and it's kind of everywhere now. This movie has massive influence. It is beloved. People put it on those lists of the best sequels that had surpassed the original. I get it. I understand it. The franchise is still going strong. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, now in theaters. But I don't like this movie, and I'm going to say that it does not stand the test of time. But next week, we will round out our Mad Max trilogy with Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I've never seen it, just like I hadn't seen any of these movies, but I will say, out of the gate, I like the title.
And you know who stars in it, right?
Mel Gibson.
You really have no idea who the co-star in that film is.
Oh, you mean Tina Turner?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
To see Tina Turner in that film, badass, would be, what the fuck, if you had no idea.
No, I know that. But we want to hear your thoughts on the Mad Max movies, on Lord Humongous and Wes and the Feral Kid and all of your favorite characters. The Gyro Captain, wubba, 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 he's wacky. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.